project management tools. So today, what we're going to talk about is what happens, in switching project management tools and how you can do it most gracefully. And the reality is you want to make sure you're selecting the right fit, that you're getting the tool that you need, that you can actually make that transition successfully, and make sure your team is onboarded, as we say, gracefully, which basically means that they're enjoying the experience, they're excited about using it. Nobody wants to have a tool that at the end of the day people say, I'm not sure why we did this. So the whole goal of this webinar is to help you set up yourselves for success as you move from one project management tool to another. So we're going to go through several concepts, and Steve and I, as always, will banter back and forth with these concepts. So we're going to talk about a lot of the spectrum of tools that are available, and we'll ask some poll questions as we go through this as well. And then we're going to talk about, when do you really need a real PM system? And I'll explain what I mean by a real PM system. And then how do you go about choosing that right system for your organization? What are some of the things you need to be thinking about? And then once you select it, what do you do then? So we'll talk probably a lot more in that particular area, because I know that's where you have there's a lot of different options for us to discuss. And then, as always, there's always going to be pitfalls. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be issues. Anybody that's on this webinar, you're all managing projects. We know that projects don't always go perfectly. There's always something to deal with, and switching project management tools is no different.
Yeah.
So let's start first with the poll. And I think, Steve, just write it in the chat for the poll.
Yeah,
right?
Go ahead and just say in the chat, are you looking to invest in a new tool? Yes or no? It's a real simple question, and within the next year or so. So anyway, let's move on.
Awesome. So there is a spectrum of tools that are out there that many of you probably are using. They come into like three categories. We talk about individual, collaborative, and then integrated, and we'll talk about that next. But there's a lot of tools out there. I actually did an extra little search a couple weeks ago, Steve, and there's a ton, a lot more than when I first started working as a project manager. So one of the ones that I see a lot of is Smartsheet. Monday has been relatively popular out there. Jira, mostly because of the agile trend that's going on in the marketplace today, and of course Microsoft. So what I consider an individual tool, it's like an Excel spreadsheet. It's like you're entering in the data, you're maintaining that data. There's no real easy way to do dependencies. You might have one project manager, two project managers. That's where those tools that are more individual make a lot of sense. And of course, the cost. So if you only have a handful of project managers and you're trying to keep your costs down, the individual type of tool makes some sense. Collaborative ones, are more that cloud-based or enterprise-based, and focus mostly on projects, and simple projects. So when you're talking about, I have to build a shed in my backyard, or I'm, planning my wedding, those kinds of singular projects make a lot of sense to put in these kinds of tools. Maybe you've got something where there's a lot more people that need access to it. Maybe you're working on a nonprofit and you're trying to run a festival or something like that. A cloud-based tool might make sense. You want it to be simple because you have people that aren't necessarily project managers, so may not understand the complexity of some of these tools.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with all of what you were saying before too. Like, there are tools. Everybody needs to use something. You've got your Microsoft projects or your Excel. We see a lot of people that just use Excel even for big teams. And also there's tools out there that, like, we're talking about collaborative ones where everybody logs in and they help you out. And, Project Insight falls into that category too, of where the team members can participate with you. And then there's tools out there that only your project management team uses or you use it by yourself. So you have to definitely decide, are we going down the road of we need a tool just for our project management team, or we need a tool where we're going to get all of the people doing the work to be part of the process? That's like probably one of the biggest delineation factors right there.
Right. And especially if you've got individuals that don't necessarily understand the concept of putting a project schedule together, you want to make it simple for them, right? That's why I think Monday has come a long way. It's like, it's relatively simple for anybody off the street to use. But when you're in an organization and you're trying to, have a lot of dependencies, make sure communication is well, it may not be the best tool.
Right.
And then we get to more what I call the higher end, more integrated models. Project Insight. Project Insight could accommodate any of those models, but these are the ones that are out there that I would say are the higher end when you're talking about managing portfolios of projects, programs with multiple projects. So if you and have a lot of integration, you want more an integrated model, right? So if these kinds of tools are probably best to handle that hybrid approach when you are hybrid project approach, when you have some agile methodology, some water methodology. They're a lot more flexible, but they are more complicated. Flexibility does come with complication, and you're not necessarily going to throw, an individual off the street to work on project task when you have a very complex model. But they don't have to be complex, but they tend to be more complex than some of the ones like a spreadsheet, a smart sheet, or a Monday.
Yeah, I mean, definitely these tools you're talking about here are more mature in the market, where, for us at Project Insight, we kind of fit in between, where we're still not as complicated or as maybe these more mature models like Primavera. We're definitely not as expensive as those tools either, but we try to follow those PMBOK processes to give you that portfolio management and all of those other things. But so definitely when you're sitting down to decide what kind of tool we're going to use, you have that whole spectrum. And these are just a handful of the tools out there. In the time that we've been doing this, there's thousands of different tools out there. And some companies, sometimes you need to use a mixture of them as well. Like we have many clients that use our tool with Microsoft DevOps, our tool with Jira, our tool with other tools as well, including spreadsheets and Power BI and things like that. You can't always get away from using those tools, but definitely the goal is to try to make sure that you're using it in a way that makes a lot of sense for your organization.
Well, right, and a lot of them have unique capabilities that make them unique in the marketplace. So you do want if you have the luxury of marrying up several tools, you might want to find the best of breed for a particular task. So one of the things, or two of the things that when you start really getting to these integrated models, two of the things that really stick out as if you have requirements for a lot of dependencies, both internal and external to your organization, or if you have a lot of requirements around making sure you're managing capacity and resources, you're not going to get the level of capabilities in the prior set of tools. Capacity planning is a really difficult one out there, and dependencies is a really difficult one out there. So you want to have, if your environment requires that, you probably should be looking more at an integrated model.
Yeah.
So the next poll. Oh, by the way, what was the answer to the
Well, we have a couple people that are participating in the chat, and the answer is, well, I know that one of them is one of our clients. He says, no, I already have a new system. Thank you very much, Mark. And not everybody's looking to tool. But again, we also have this get posted to our YouTube, and so not everybody is live.
Gotcha. So on this particular poll, go ahead and put in the chat, if you're using any of these. Obviously, we know we have at least one Project Insight user out there. If you're using any of these, or if you're using some other ones that maybe we're not aware of, and maybe there's some new ones out there that we should be aware of and be integrating with.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that is, again, like we're at Project Insight, we don't believe that our tool can do everything for everybody, which is why we've spent time on the Jira integration, and we have a bi-directional integration with Jira. We have a integration with DevOps and some other collaborative tools as well. Like Microsoft Teams is another big one that we're completely integrated with Office 365 and SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, because we're not going to reinvent the wheel and develop our own messaging platform. Microsoft Teams has a really great one. Let's leverage that versus trying to, compete in all models. And I think most tools out there have settled on that, because, 10 years ago, there was, I believe, even like Atlassian developed their own chat program, and then Slack came along, and then, I don't think anyone uses what they had originally built. And, there was the Yammer, I think, was another one of those that Salesforce bought them, but I don't know anyone who uses that anymore. You're pretty much down to either Teams or Slack for communication. So our approach has always been to be good at what we're good at, which is like the capacity planning and the time tracking and the task management and the collaboration, and then integrate with the tools where those are great tools too. Like Jira is great for software development tools. There are reasons why a lot of our clients need to keep using that. They have a smaller, like a dev team that likes that tool, and then the rest of the organization might use our tool. So
and
we found that to work really well.
Yeah, and you and I actually experienced it several years ago. It's like, how you set up the integrations between like a Project Insight and a Jira, is super important for the success of the tool. So really you need to be thinking about what are those best of breed tools that your company needs, and what would you need and how would you need that to be integrated.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that, there's a point in time when you say, I need a real project management system. And I hinted to it. It's really, if you have multiple project managers, if you have shared resources, if you have task tracking that's needed, you really need to have something more than an Excel spreadsheet, and or something simple like a Smartsheet. So I've worked with Smartsheet a lot. I've worked with spreadsheets a lot. Trying to share them in a SharePoint environment, have people access. They don't know what they're doing. They make a mistake. They mess up something. It once you get to the point where you have too many people touching one area without the appropriate controls, then you really need to be able to get to the next level. You don't want people filling out your own tasks, right? You want an individual filling out their task. You don't want anybody coming into a Smartsheet and saying, oh, I made a mistake and I put my hours on the wrong line, which belonged to Mary. So those kinds of controls really are what warrant going to something that's a more comprehensive project management solution.
Yeah, and this is, I want to touch base on this a little bit too. At Project Insight, we've been automating the project manager's job from the day one, because we started with a collaborative tool. And when you
the
talk
first
about
name in your company is Project.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we still find today many clients are using spreadsheets. And, I think that this is a big thing that I always see in the environment, is that, like, if you're doing 30 projects and you have 30 spreadsheets that basically have the same tasks in them, and then you're taking your team and saying, well, go into each of one of these 30 spreadsheets and update your stuff. That's a real simple way to do it. But the problem is that spreadsheet's not going to email you that something's due. It's not going to tell you that someone's going to start it. There's not a real easy way to like slice all 30 of them and say, here's the tasks for, one person, and here's all the tasks for another person. It creates a lot of work for the team as a whole. But I find that, like, web systems, a spreadsheet's easier to use than a web browser tool. And so a lot of people, when they're thinking about project management as a project manager, you might be saying, well, that's hard for me, to do it all in a web or in a, with shared database. It's a little more work, quote unquote. It's a little more work. in sometimes in the data entry. But what you don't always understand is that the efficiency comes from the fact that your team members update the tasks for you. It'll email you, your team, let them know you're done. You can get all your data reports all in one place online. And so, I think most people these days, though, they know that the spreadsheet model isn't the best and that the collaborative tools are the way to go. But then when you go to the collaborative tool, it's like, will it have enough things I need? Is the big dilemma there.
Well, what you're basically highlighting is the quality, as you grow, the quality of the data that comes out of the system gets poorer in the simple models of Excel. And so it does require, and anybody that thinks from a efficiency standpoint, sometimes you have to put a little more effort up front to be able to make the whole system efficient. So yes, you're right. When you move from like an Excel spreadsheet to a collaborative integrated tool, you do have to do a little bit more work one time.
Right.
And by doing that little bit more work makes the entire system more efficient. It may require that the project manager has to do a bit more work. I would probably argue that because before you had to go to 30 different spreadsheets, and the chances of you getting through all 30 without getting interrupted and getting them all done, that's a whole other story. But, it's probably the same amount of work, just different, but the system is much more efficient when you get to that place where you have multiple projects, programs, portfolios you're trying to manage, and the quality of the data that comes out is significantly better. So those are the things really to think about.
Yeah, and I think about it like this too. If everyone has CRM systems out there, imagine if you were putting all your contacts into spreadsheets all across your organization, and see a CRM, people know you can't even start like that. But still, to this day, many companies run on spreadsheets, and they do it that way. And then, obviously we're going to talk a little bit more later on this, is that the benefit of getting in the collaborative model requires that you have cooperation from your team, and even cooperation from your other project managers. Because one of the things that is a challenge when we bring companies on board is you may have a team of 10 project managers, and 3 of them do it one way, 3 of them do it another way, and 3 of them do it another way. And you kind of have to merge your concepts together in your collaborative tool, like how you name things and what your processes are. So in a way, picking a tool help you actually, because it forces those questions.
It forces the
resolved.
Consistency. Yeah, it absolutely forces the consistency. And your example to a CRM system, is a really great one, because companies have adopted these CRM systems much more out there in the marketplace. And, it does take time to get used to. It does take, but once you see that value, and again, think about what that value is you want. What is it, that value that you need when you're trying to select one, because that's going to help drive those requirements, and that's going to help drive your selection.
Yeah, but also too, the other crazy thing is that project management and collaboration, I always get asked this question because of the proliferation of tools. There's so many different processes and ways for people to do things that you would think that there'd be a Salesforce of project management out there right now. And even though the crazy thing is Salesforce is actually being deconstructed now these days with newer CRM tools, but project management's unlike accounting or CRM, there's so much variation in processes that there's a need for more tools out there, and there's so many more players, I think, because of that. But anyway, getting back to the maturity of CRM versus project management is companies will always invest in sales, and then they make the project managers work on a shoestring.
How many people have had to do that? Raise your hand.
It's kind of this red-headed stepchild concept of, they want you to do it. They want the results of the project managers having all the tools, but it's not always the thing that companies want to spend their money on.
Well, and you know what, that goes to that value comment that I made earlier, and that you bring up another point is I've seen organizations where they say, "Oh, we're just going to get this tool for the 2 project managers
Yeah.
we have." But the value really isn't in getting it to the project managers, the getting it to the project managers so that they can assign tasks and have all of the project team working with it.
Yeah.
So it really is an enterprise solution
Yeah.
when it all comes down, because the project managers aren't the only ones working on that project. And
Right.
I've seen people try to limit the number of licenses, and then it fails because you've tried to limit the licenses, and then it's not as useful because only one person or 2 people are able to access it and update it.
Right. And that's where the automation is, which is what our vision here at Project Insight is, to automate the project manager's job, essentially. That's one of our visions, is to help with that. So the automation really is where the benefit is in what you talk about. So getting that data in one system, letting the system do its job, and filtering the data for you and notifying everybody and telling you when someone's over capacity, getting the time tracking all in one place so that you don't have like 3 places to go get that data and have to manually cobble up reports.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because one of the other things too on this last bullet here about dependencies, a lot of times when I've taught project management classes and taught, the whole piece of scheduling, and I've taught Microsoft project classes, I've taught Project Insight classes, there's a misconception out there that if I put a dependency on the system and something causes that dependency to shift, that I need to go back and fix it and move that date back. And like, that's not right. What you do want the system to tell you when something shifted based on the plan. You don't want to force those dates. And that's what a lot of people do in the Excel environment. They just plug in dates.
Yeah.
And then they're surprised when something doesn't happen on a date. What you want a system to do is, if there's a lot of dependencies, if there's any dependencies, if something happened in the project where maybe somebody was sick for a week and it pushed their task out a week, you want the system to tell you that, oops, at this moment, everything just shifted a week because Mary was out sick for the last week. So you don't want to just push the date back. You want to now analyze the whole project and see if there's ways to adjust it to maybe save time on some other tasks downstream. But you want the system to tell you those things. You don't want just to be surprised. So that's always been a revelation when people, go through a true scheduling class and they realize that, oh my God, I want the system to tell me. I don't want to have to just find it out myself. I want the system to yell at me that things got pushed. And that gives me at least enough runway to start working on it, because I'm going to know immediately when something triggered that schedule to get pushed.
Yeah, and what you're referring to, the successor predecessor feature. Yep. We have that built right in. Some tools do, some tools don't. The other thing that I find interesting is that there's always been a push for agile, and everyone wants to be quote unquote agile. But really, the reality is that most projects, we talked about this in our last webinar or 2 webinars ago. The reality is that most projects require all the methodology. So, some of these tools, like we see companies that are trying to shoehorn waterfall processes into Jira, and Jira doesn't even support that philosophy. They're more Scrum and sprint oriented, which is a great process, and you need that process. But one of the things that we really worked hard on here is allowing you to have a project doesn't have to be locked into any methodology. You can start with Kanban, go to waterfall, have an agile part in it, and then it land back on waterfall again, which is very, very common in most projects to have phases where you're using all the different ways. And I think dependencies, like you talk about, is really a critical one, because you want to be able to link up your tasks and reschedule one and have the thing automatically calculate the other ones for you.
Right.
And you'd be surprised, even when we bring new customers on, that we end up teaching them how to do that, and it saves them a lot of time.
I don't think I've ever come across a customer that told me that my end date can be never ending.
Oh yeah. Is that a take on Jira, the way Jira works? The projects go on and on and
Just
on.
keep going. Just keep going.
But really, that's a program, and it's really a misnomer, I think, in that particular tool. That when we integrate with Jira, for example, there's no defined end to those projects. They're really a placeholder for what I would consider an ongoing program, which is usually centered around a product that somebody's making. And we'll like map an epic in Jira to a project because an executive wants a defined start, a defined end, a defined goals, like the components of what a project are they expect. And it's really hard to get that out of a tool where the project doesn't have a closure.
No.
So I don't actually think that when you make a project in that particular tool, it really is a project. It's really a program, and you have to actually probably make epics in that tool to define where your boundaries are. Or a sprint, in my mind, is really a mini project.
Well, it's iterations. It's iterative.
Correct.
So, you're absolutely right, Steve. It's like, you have to use the right tool, and for the need that you have and the expectations of whoever's receiving the end result. So to your point, a product's going to have a life cycle, and that life cycle might go on for a long time, and in that particular case, utilizing a relatively or a very strong agile methodology makes sense. But if you've got a finite budget and a finite set of requirements, hybrid's probably what you're going to see more out there nowadays. And we talked about that in our last one. Mm-hmm. So to keep ourselves going, because we could continue to talk about this for a long time, right, Steve?
We
talked about a lot of things. So, some other hints and tips and tricks in choosing the right system. Maybe you've thought about this, maybe you haven't, but, really understand the feature sets that you need, like we talked about. Definitely look at reviews. I'm a little skeptical of reviews sometimes and review sites because sometimes there's a pay for play, but it does make sense to look at them and to get that perspective.
I want to go back to your first point for a minute.
Okay, go for it.
I think it's critical when you're going to start out on a process to decide what kind of tool you have, that you write down what you think you need feature-wise and why, and then rank those things. Because sometimes things that you think are really important on the surface maybe aren't as critical. And we see it all the time too. When people come to us, they usually, not always, but sometimes they have a list of these are what we know we need. It's a lot easier for us as a vendor to respond to that on one hand, but then on the other hand, you can get locked into that too. But I do think it's important to understand, to spend a little time on yours before you begin even.
And
really
also
knowing what those things are.
Yeah. And to add to that, go beyond your own department.
Right. And agree on them. That's the other thing. You might agree on this one, and then your colleagues think it's another one. So
and go beyond your department too, because one of the things, it's all about getting buy-in, and projects they're tightly related to sales, accounting, strategy. So you may think you have all the requirements and all the features you need, but if you have been working in like a Excel spreadsheet model for years and you want to look at having something more collaborative, go beyond the professional services team that you might be working in and go talk to those other departments, because there's probably value that you can add by a capability like, tracking completion, percent complete, that there's a revenue recognition capability that your finance department may need. Knowing when projects are scheduled to be completed, your sales and your customer account management people want to know that. They want to have visibility into when these projects are getting completed, and also maybe even how much time it's been taking. So often I see a lot of unnecessary communications and email and Slack and everything. Well, when's this project going to be done? The project manager, if we had a tool that showed that people can go to see that kind of value, maybe we don't need to have so many emails and so many
Well,
Slack
yeah.
messages. And, so go beyond your own department to make sure that you're looking at the most important features you need.
Mhm.
Thanks for stopping me then, Steve.
Yeah, no, right. So once you know what your features are, then you can start looking at the tools.
Yep.
And it's hard to find. The other thing is that, the websites say a lot, but I would say when you're looking at the features, sometimes just because a lot of vendors will just check a box if they have something. So you really do need to look more closely at capacity planning in our tool is different than capacity planning in other people's tools, and time tracking in our tool is different than, so that it's really hard. I think when you casting your net real wide, it's good to at least get a handful of them that you need and try to see which ones are highlighting the features that you think you need. Which ones are the tools are saying that they're really, really great at a particular feature versus just checking the box on it.
Right.
That's where the reviews help.
I also like the recommendation here about, calling the tech support and customer service. I love that. See what it's about. I actually was working with a CRM system that their email customer service was great, but every month your ID, if you didn't touch the system for a month, you'd have to contact them to have yourself reset. I'm like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever, So it definitely is worth doing a bit of due diligence on, the support, on the reviews, and making sure, even referrals or references on the last bullet, you make sure there isn't a flash in the pan. So has anybody similar to you used this tool before? And, can't hurt to ask for a referral.
I want to promote ourselves here because we pride ourselves on customer service being the best at that in our space. So one of the things that is unique about what we do is we have every week on Wednesdays, we have a free training session where someone from our team, a real person, hops on Zoom. You don't need an appointment. You don't need budget. You can just come for free. We've been doing this for years. And you can talk, most likely you're going to talk to someone on the DevOps team or the success team. Will be there to answer your questions and take your feedback. And in fact, we have clients that come a lot and they'll talk to each other or help each other out. It's a little bit of a community that we provide.
Awesome.
And then, some tools, you're not calling anyone at Microsoft if you have a problem. Primavera, PlanView, you're not going to be able to call them. One of the things that we've known in project management is that the tool will get you 85-90% of the way on its own generally, and there's another 10% that you want. And it's useful, I think, to be able to have a service-oriented company that will help you accomplish those goals, because it's not worth it for your team to go in and learn how to work with Power BI for a report, unless you already do it, or work with the API. One of the things that's unique about us is we've been more service-oriented this whole 20-year period, and that's where our strength is as a company versus we have this website out there. We want millions and millions of clients, and good luck on getting your feature request done, because you're just a number to the Borg of the software as a service. And that, we pride ourselves on kind of being in between those worlds where we are software as a service, and we do have a freemium that you can use for free on our website. But at the same time, you can actually talk to an engineer or a success person and get things accomplished that you might need. So that's kind of where we fit versus some of the larger companies out there that just are, wanting you to sign up and figure it out with all their YouTube stuff. Right. And we have all the YouTube stuff. We're trying to do that stuff too. Hey, it's Friday night and, after hours, or maybe you're in somewhere other part of the world. We do have the videos. That's really cool. Important. I think you should check out. Does the company have an open website? Are they open with their stuff? We have videos all over our YouTube channel because we know that eventually you might want to just help yourself. So there's that part, but then we don't force you to have to help yourself. If you can help yourself by using the resources in there, but if you don't want to, you can at least call someone. So I think you should decide early on in your process, or do we want that kind
What
of
kind of support do you want?
white glove service
Mhm.
vendor, or do we just gonna wing it on our own? And that makes a big difference
It does.
in who you're gonna look at.
It does. Thanks, Steve.
Mhm.
Okay, so we had you like looking at everything and trying to decide what tools out there will meet your needs. These couple bullets is really, have a few people make the decision based on the key prioritized items that are features that you need, and make sure that it's communicated out there to your organization, that everybody understands it. And to the last point, it's about broadcasting it. This is what it's going to be like. So I've used a process called "Wouldn't it be great if" process to kind of articulate that vision. So trying to put a vision out there as to what this is going to be, because a lot of, like I said earlier, if you're moving from Excel spreadsheet to a integrated system because you need to get there, you've got to kind of define what that vision is and get people to understand that vision. And sometimes putting in a picture is awesome. And you can have a lot of people in that decision-making process, but it really comes down to who's going to benefit the most out of it. And those are the individuals that should make that final decision.
Mm-hmm.
And
can we let's go back to that point for a minute. So we're talking about building a team that's going to help you select everything. And I think this is really hard, this part of selecting, because we see all kinds of different prospects. So like sometimes when they come to us, we're demoing to 50 people and they're just going to vote on it. And then sometimes we're just talking to the PMs and they haven't even brought any of the team members in. So there's this fine line that you have to walk between having a core team making the decision, but still allowing the rest of your people that are going to work on the tool have some say.
Right.
Versus like it's just going to be a democracy vote, because sometimes it goes to the democracy and then the PMs don't get the features they need.
Right.
The other risk is that you pick a small team and then you don't tell the team members, and then they have mutiny on you later when you pick it. So you've got to like figure out in your organization how are we going to make them part of when I say them, the whole company or the whole team or department or whoever you're doing the tool for, how do you make them part of the process without having the tail wagging the dog?
Well,
so you need to spend time on that.
That's where I'm saying, coming up with that vision of what it's going to look like and having, that takes time. Anytime you're going to create a vision, it's like, what is this going to look like when it's all said and done? And you need that buy-in. So going through that exercise of, wouldn't it be great if, and to your point, Steve, you do not want it just to be, whoever has the majority of the features is the one that wins. That's right. Not the way to select, the tool. It really comes down to, what do we want to do with this tool and what's the value of that tool? So I keep going back to value. It's like anything else, anybody selecting any kind of software, and I do software development at my day job, right? So it's what value am I getting, and can I justify that value? So
the value for the whole company as a whole, because it's going to be a compromise no matter what you do. You're going to be compromising on something.
Yeah.
So otherwise if a tool works for like only a small subset of your team and then not the rest, then you're going to be starting over again.
There's going to be people that are disappointed. Absolutely.
Right. And I think that it's really hard to get that team. I don't know that there's any right answer, but it's something that I think that when you go to evaluate, you should really spend a lot of time on in making sure that everyone's part of the process, but just in the right way.
Yeah, and I'll do a little plug here just from a project management standpoint, is you do not want people making a decision that don't understand what project management is and can do.
Yeah.
It can't be a dollar cost. I mean, you need people that really understand that project management is a necessary function in most companies. I'd say almost all, in my opinion. But if you're having people on that decision-making team that don't appreciate that role, then they're not the right people on that team.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and the other thing too is that some departments are more vocally opposed to things than others. Like IT teams sometimes are the hardest because they don't, their job is very pressure filled. There's always stuff going on when you're in, more stuff that can be done in the time that can be done. The expectations are very high. And a lot of times you might get some resistance from your dev team because they're like set, like we have our process and we don't want to change. So you really need to spend more time with certain groups depending on, what's going on with them. So, software engineers, a lot of them, sometimes we encounter those teams and they're simpler, they're the ones leading the charge. So it depends on your organization, what your culture is.
Right.
You also get, when you do bring a tool, there are certain people too out there that they've been doing their job for years. Everything's dialed. And now all of a sudden, wait, I have to log in and tell you I'm done with something. There's going to be those people. And sometimes just a few of those we're not going to say bad apple, but those people that provide some resistance because they don't want to change. I know. But you got to be mindful of your team and what the culture is and what that reaction is going to be, because there are situations, and it's less so to these. This happens less now than it used to because everyone has Facebook and they're used to collaborating online. But there was a time, 10 years ago when people weren't online that much. They have their job dialed. I'm talking about your team members that get stuff done. They just want to go to the meeting and say, yeah, I did it all, but they don't want to log on to a browser or a smartphone and do it because that's something new to them. You'll have to spend more time with those team members when you're moving to a tool.
Right. And that brings us to this slide, right? Where it's like, what you're talking about is how do you successfully deliver a project? So changing over to a new software, to a new project management tool, it is a project.
Yeah.
So you've got to follow all the same methods because you should have a chart, or you should have your business justifications. You should know your requirements. You should know who your stakeholders are, whether or not their stakeholders are in favor of the change or not in favor of the change. So you got to go through all of that mindset and all of those processes that we know from the PMBOK guide, that to understand what this project is going to take to deliver successfly. We talked a little bit, the other day when you and I were chatting about onboarding. What's some of the options? Do you do it cold turkey, or do you do it incrementally and move on, piece by piece? And that's going to depend on your organization and what you're dealing with. So the answer to every project management question is it depends, right? So you have to evaluate your current situation, your current stakeholders, your current people that are going to be affected. We have to think about change management. What does that take? How are we going to train people? How are we going to ensure that you deliver it? What I've seen work well is a couple times, and again, I'm not involved with everything out there in the world, right? Is working more on a cold turkey kind of methodology. It could be department by department or function by function, but probably more like department by department, taking an iterative approach to, these are the features that are bare minimum, and we're going to learn those now. And then evolve it. Okay, now we're going to add these other 2 features that we wanted to do. Everybody's getting used to the system. Everybody's starting to understand it. It's not meeting everything we want yet, but you iteratively. So you could take a somewhat agile approach to moving things out, but you need to have that plan. Just like in the last conversation we had. What are the capabilities we need? What is that vision we want to see it as? And map out how you're going to implement it. And what's the most important things need to get done first, because you want to win. You want to win up front, that people can say, oh, we were able to do that. Great. Now let's go on to the next one. So you got to see progress.
Yeah, we get the question all the time when someone's looking at switching to our tool, is like, well, how long is your onboarding? And so the answer to that is it depends, like we just said. And some companies onboard real fast because they've got no processes right now, and they only need to do task management, project management, and some basic reporting. They have a few things that can be done really fast. Then you have other organizations where they are already in a sophisticated tool. They know they got to switch. Their team is all trained. And, you know, you did raise the question of, do we just switch over in one all at once? Do we switch over one department at a time? Do we switch over one project at a time? Those questions you're going to have to ask yourself and the vendor you choose. We see it all different ways. You know, and sometimes companies, they just want to be cautious and they'll start with one or two projects. You know, we had it last year with a client that I was working with personally, that they were like, well, we're going to start with a few of the new projects. And then they got in our tool and they're like, oh, well, let's move them all over now. So that happens too, where the plan was, we're going to be cautious. We're going to stick with that particular company was using spreadsheets still. And they had part of the team using the spreadsheets and part of the team using the new tool. And then once they started getting in the tool, they realized, oh, that wasn't so hard. It was actually a lot easier than we thought. Then they were like in a hurry to get those other projects loaded in.
That's a great problem to have, right?
Yeah, but we have some, and we have some, if you're a larger company, you know, 500 or 1,000 users, you may go one department at a time to get everybody in there. Or the other way is having a narrower feature set that you start with, like that you just mentioned a minute ago. And that gets back to where if you go to the beginning and you're like, what are the critical things that we need to have? That also can help you decide when you're onboarding, hey, we'll just do task management, project management, and some things. We won't worry about time tracking just yet. You know, we won't worry about integrating with our accounting system or our Salesforce. We'll do it manually just for a little while. Like those kinds of decisions help you onboard a lot faster.
Out and manually transfer the data. You know, some little workarounds for the time being. Right.
Yeah, but the other thing I think you should be aware of is, like, when you're selecting a tool, there are some tools out there that say your onboarding is for free, right? There's nothing out there in the world that's free. Onboarding is time consuming. Either you're going to do the majority of the work because you're not having any budget for your onboarding, or like what you mentioned before, you should consider this as a regular project. Wait, we're going to add another project onto all the project managers. You know, like we have to do our own project for our project. No, we don't need to do that, right? I mean, but it is a new project and you should have a budget. And I don't care what tool you're implementing, you probably need to consider professional services hours from the vendor you're going to choose, whether it's us or some other tool. And even if they say you don't need it, that puts the work on your team. It's probably not as efficient as letting the vendor help you. And I'm a big advocate of making sure that you think ahead and plan on actually having some help. We have clients that we onboarded that are in a continuous onboarding where we do some things every quarter, or, you know, constantly in refining their processes. So having someone that can support you, that you can call if there's a problem, like, to me, I think those are critical things, because not everything in software, you know, even the big companies have challenges out there. Like, you know, Amazon has you know, big ISPs sometimes go down or whatever. It's nice for your event, for you, if this is a critical feature, to make sure you have someone that you can rely on that has your best interest in making sure you have your processes going. So consider making sure you have budget for not just the licenses, but for getting help when you onboard your tool.
Yep, I agree. And then, we've kind of talked about some of this, but some of the things to be cautious about. You know, you cannot expect to train once and stop.
Okay.
You know, to Steve's point, I love the fact that Project Insight does that every Wednesday. Just jump on, whoever you are. That's awesome because people will have questions, people will have concerns. And the minute you ignore their questions and concerns, they will throw up their hands and they will say, I'm done, not doing it. And they'll have a bad taste in their mouth. And then your whole onboarding process is going to fail. And then, like I said earlier, don't try to swallow the elephant. Have a few objectives that everybody agrees would be beneficial to start with, that you can see a win, that you can learn to be proficient in, and that, that management sees the value. This, like I said earlier, a lot of times people don't understand the value of project management. So there's the project management stuff, and there's huge value to efficient project management practices. But it doesn't have to all be done at once. We all know that you don't have to do everything in the PMBOK guide to be successful. You pick and choose the things that are needed for the environment you're in, and then you learn to be proficient at them. And then as people start asking new questions, you have other tools you can bring to the table and improve that process. So you have to have that continuous improvement mindset for any of these tools, for like project management, CRM, any of these tools, contracting systems, ERP systems. You can't throw it all out there at once. It has to be an iterative type of approach. So make sure you're thinking about it from that perspective, and make sure you're giving your people the support they need to be able to learn it in the way that they can learn it. Don't just throw it out. It's like, well, just go to the website and go look at the videos. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that, and when I do that and it's not what I'm looking for, then I'm going to get frustrated. Point me to the specific video that I should be looking at, help people learn it, help people adopt it. Adoption is the end game. If you get everybody that you want adopting the software, you're going to be as efficient as you possibly can as an organization. If only half of the people adopt it, you're not going to have the economies of scale. You're not going to have the benefits that you thought you would get. And that's when people say, oh, the software didn't do its job. Well, maybe we didn't have a good adoption plan in our organization, and that was the failure.
Great. And that gets back to what we were saying earlier, just getting them involved a little bit upfront helps.
Yep, I agree. Do we have any questions from the audience? I mean, we've been chatting away here. So
they were chatting for a little while, and then it got quiet. Progressive adoption is clearly a must, along with good practice reminders. That's come from Jean-Marc Bueller.
Absolutely. Great idea.
Jean-Marc, I'm not sure if I said that right. Sorry.
Jean-Marc. Where's
I know.
I get your little French going on.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're about wrapping it up. I'll keep checking the chat. There is a delay, so I don't get them right away. But for those of you guys who want the PDU, click on the QR code. Isn't that a great invention out there? The QR code will be available for anybody who is looking at this webinar behind live for only a short period of time. So we have a lot of people who register and then they watch it maybe a half hour after or later in the day. So, Project Insight user, that's awesome.
Yay.
And I know I saw a couple other people that I recognize their names in there today. Yeah, so next upcoming webinars, we are having a webinar on capacity planning in April, which is not a PDU one. It's more of a product one we've introduced at Project Insight, some features that people have asked for a long time, which is the ability to do capacity from the top down, meaning like if I don't have my work breakdown structure figured out, I need to rough out who's going to do what for, even if it's just the roles. We've added that feature in our tool so that you can plan out a 6-week project or a 12-week project and estimate at a high level how many hours it is without putting tasks in the tool. So we're going to be demoing that in April, which I think we had a note. And then April 19th, 5 keys to managing any projects. That'll be a session.
This is a series of 5 sessions that we're going to be going through.
These will be great. So definitely thanks for attending, everybody. And we're looking forward to having these PDUs. This is our 4th one, so we're getting better every time, and we're going to keep going with it. So thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.